and a few other more questions. But right now, you touch on technology. And that was also another misconception that I had before reading your book is that, I've always thought about video games as an inducer of ADD. And I would always think, I'm playing Call of Duty, I'm going to get mad with people. I'm gonna go to Publix and I'm gonna be mad. Let's just put it that way. It doesn't happen. I'm a good kid, so it doesn't happen. But it could induce it. That's the point. And if I'm gonna play MLB The Show every time, I'm a huge baseball fan. I'm gonna be distracted, and I'm gonna, and our parents always tells us, don't be in games all the time. But you argue a different point, which is very counterintuitive and extremely insightful, which is we can leverage video games. We can ask why are they so engaging for our kids, and we can apply them for education. So can you please expand on this idea on how can we leverage video games to other education systems?
For sure. And I want to start by preface that I wasn't a gamer growing up. Of course, I played Nintendo and I enjoyed it and Super Mario and this and that, but I wasn't a gamer. I was, I had so many other things that I was doing in them that I just wasn't drawn to that as much. But I also want to say that I'm not incentivizing, every kid should be spending all their day playing video games. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I am curious about everything. And so naturally, I became curious about video games when I noticed that they were teaching kids certain skills that are really important for the real world. And that as a teacher, I realized that we were not teaching in school. So I was like, what is it about video games that, for example, get kids to keep going even when they fail? We've talked about this and how important it is to teach kids this skill. And we're not doing a good job in school. We're doing the opposite. And so suddenly when they play video games, they're like, I failed. It doesn't matter. Let me try again. And let me try again. And let me try again. And they can try 100 times. They don't get discouraged until they achieve the next level. And there's a power to that. So that's sort of the first thing that drew me to that. Then when I started studying video games and sort of going into the research, and I had the same concerns that you did. And in my book, I'm sure you read, I cite all the research to kind of give this information to parents, and they can do whatever they want with this. But a few things came up. First, there's a lot we can learn from game designers because they design very compelling learning experiences. Because if you think about what's going on in video games, they are constantly learning new skills. Some of them are transferable to the real world, some of them are not. And those that are transferable, by the way, there has to be a process. It doesn't naturally, it's not like you play a game and then you naturally know what to do in the real world. No, there's a whole reflection component that has to happen that usually an adult is really good at getting involved here, so that kids are able to translate all the good things that they're learning in video games to the real world. And I talk about how and give strategies in the book of what parents can do for that. But what I learned is the thing that I find the most fascinating is that video games are sort of like the ultimate learning machine because they teach you that you can teach yourself anything, right? And so kids are picking up on these skills, not because a teacher is telling me, no, just because by trying and figuring things out and this and that until they realize and learn all these different skills. And so it also gives them this feeling of competence of, wow, I'm able to achieve these things on my own that a lot of kids are not feeling in school. Because in school, the way curriculums are set up and the one size fits all lesson plans and this and that, a lot of kids never experience competence, which is a basic human need. And so there's a little bit of that too. But I think that when you look at the research behind it, you were talking about Call of Duty and, the shooter games and this and that. This is a decision that you need to make as a family if you're going to allow your kids to play, quote unquote, violent games or not, right? But if you actually, and, that's a very personal decision, but if you actually look at the data, it shows that if you're playing violent games, that does not mean that you're going to be doing violent things in the real world. However, if you're playing violent games with strangers online that are anonymous, that you cannot put a face to, then and you're doing it all the time, like that, sort of like those kind of games make up the majority of your gaming time, then that can result in a problem. So what the data suggests is that if you are going to be engaging in shooter games or like violent games, that it should not consume most of the time that you're playing games online, and it should be with people that family, friends, and so people that you can put a face to, so that you don't have those like negative consequences after it. So that's one thing. That doesn't mean, for example, when my kids want to play video games, I'm going to incentivize them not to play those aggressive games, just because it doesn't really make sense for me as a family, not because of this concern that's going to make them more violent, just because, as a family, for me and my values, like I just don't think it's as productive as other games that I've seen. But again, no judgment for those that want to engage in those games. And so That's just, part of it. Then also there's a lot of research that shows the amount of time that is okay for kids to play so that it doesn't become an addiction and an obsession. And, I talk about how it's 21 hours a week. I'm not saying that you should go and tell your kid to play 21 hours a week, but up to 21 hours, you don't see negative consequences. And so if your kid is a gamer and it's really interested in gaming and this is their thing, instead of seeing, trying to suppress that and looking at all the negative sides of it and this and that and talking about the addiction component, I have a whole chapter in the book about the psychology behind screens that talks about, well, what is it that they're so drawn to? And you as a parent figuring that out is really helpful in order to help your kid, find these experiences in the real world as well. And so there's a lot to unpack here. I love this. There are a lot of strategies like this concept of flow, where you actually get kids to, or adults or whoever's playing, to be in this like state where everything kind of stops, everything shuts down, and you're able to really concentrate in this one thing and practice that craft a lot until you get really good at it. That I think that if we're able to bring to the real world and to learning experiences that state, and we're able to replicate that, it would be game changing in education. So I talk about different ways that we can do that and the principles of game design that we can bring to learning experiences to draw kids to learn better and learn more and want to engage. I also talk about gamification versus pointsification, because there's a big distinction there. A lot of people in the education world try to gamify learning to get kids excited. The problem with that is that you're grabbing the elements of games that are actually the least attractive for your intrinsic motivation, and making it all about that. So it's not really about the learning. And what happens is that when the learning gets hard, it's going to get to a point where it's hard. Those extrinsic motivators fade, and then the characters and the points and all the gamification, which is really pointsification, is not strong enough to get kids to want to continue to learn. So it kind of defeats this idea of helping them become lifelong learners. So I talk about all that and then talk about what we can do to grab the best elements of game to bring to the learning process. And so there's a lot here that, again, has opened my eyes to what can we learn. That's sort of the frame that I grab with everything. When people are like, what's good? What's bad? What do you recommend? I'm like, I feel like you can learn from everything, right? Even from those things that you're like, this is really terrible and, screens and blah, blah. Like, if you're curious, and going back to the first question you asked me, if you're curious enough to dive into these topics with an open mind and trying to leave your misconceptions behind, and just with I want to learn more about it, you will find that there are always two sides of it, and you can grab and choose whatever works for your family. But I do believe that making technology the enemy is never the right answer, because technology is part of our world, is here to stay, and kids need a lot of help navigating it. And so we need to be their allies, not, what's that barrier between them and technology, because otherwise they're going to figure it out on their own.
Wow, yeah, that's really really insightful, and it was one of the most interesting insights from the learning game that I took, and now that listening to you, it's even more interesting. And Anna, right now you touch on technology and how it's here to stay and it's gonna disrupt everything, and I know.